Hey everybody, so this is Josh Bruce, and I've been messing around with a string class that I've been building on my phone in an app called DraftCode. And it was basically getting to the point that it was time for me to move on to bringing it into the real world, possibly. And basically, it's a class that handles manipulation and storage of strings, and I wanted to mimic as much as I could the feeling of Swift, and seeing if I could do that with PHP. And so the drawback to doing this on my phone is that to the best of my knowledge, I don't have a way of doing automated testing. So I couldn't do test-driven development outside of literally just writing a setup and then running it on a screen. And the way to run it on a screen, of course, is to have a PHP server running, which is what's nice about DraftCode, is that it will actually create a PHP environment for you. So when I do that on the desktop, basically I have an application called MAMP Pro, and it just makes it easier for me to set everything up and get everything running. So basically I just start the servers, and it, depending on how many hosts I actually have, it will start them for all of those hosts. And right now you can see that localhost has the document root of desktop. So if I click on this, it will bring up Safari, and Safari says it can't find anything, so which is to be expected. So I'm going to go to string.php, and you can see basically this is the output of all of my tests, all of my manual tests. So I'm going to keep that running. Go ahead and hide it though. And so this video is mainly about just setting things up and getting things going. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new screen, or a new window, and call this, sorry, I'm going to create a new folder, call it string, and then open it inside of Sublime Text, which is the editor that I use. And I'm going to bring the class I've been working on my phone into the real world as well. So now that we have a folder, we want to try to set up a package environment. And the way that we typically will do that is we will create something called a composer.json file. Go ahead and save that right there. And it's going to need content. So I'm going to grab my cheat sheet here. And this is the content. That. And basically, if we take a look at it, you have the name of the package itself, so eightfold/string, a description, which is just a library for manipulating strings, what version you're currently at, what type of package it is. So I believe there's package, project, and library. So since this is a very small thing that does a very small set of things, I'm just going to call it a library. If I do end up open sourcing it completely, I will put it under the MIT license. I am the only registered author of it as of right now. Of course, I could add more later. With require, there is a difference between require and require dev. Require basically says for this thing to operate in a production environment, these things need to be true. And in this particular case, PHP 7 or greater. Require dev, this is actually where we get our testing environment. And so you can see Mockery and PHP Unit, which is the big one, and PHP Unit code coverage. Minimal stability for any of the packages that are in here is they must be stable. And what I'm going to do is auto load a namespace, so eightfold string, in a source directory, which we'll create later, as well as in the auto load dev environment, a namespace called eightfold string tests. and that's going to be a tests folder, which is source and tests is pretty standard issue. Right? So that's pretty much it for there. Another thing that I'm going to need is a terminal window, and I'm going to make sure that we are in the desktop project folder. Now, if I try to run a command, say PHP unit, that command's not found because it's not in the global space and it's not installed in this local space. If it gets installed, or when it gets installed in the local space, it should be something like vendor bin PHP unit. That also doesn't exist because, as you can see, we don't have a vendor folder. So really the only thing that I can do where it's actually going to have positive side effect is composer install. And composer is installed, the composer command is installed globally on my machine. You can read the docs on how to do that. And what composer install will do is it will take a look at what's inside of require and require dev, and it will start to download all of those files and all of the dependencies for those files as well, right? So notice, we've got a lot more than just a couple of things, even though we only have a couple of things in our composer.json file. So now that we have that, then we should be able to say vendor bin PHP unit and try to run it, and it's going to sort of explode. It doesn't know what to do. And that's because by default, it's looking for a file, a PHP unit XML file. So I'm going to go ahead and create one right there. I'm going to come back to my cheat sheet, and we're going to do that. Now I'm not going to go through all of it. Definitely check out the PHP unit docs. Suffice to say that you have a test suite, and I've given this one a name called unit. And that's because I can use a flag in here called test suite, I think is what it is. And yeah, test suite and name, and it will only run the files within the directory identified. Okay? Tests inside the files that are identified. Otherwise, just running PHP unit will run everything that it can find in every test suite inside of the test suite's tags. So it's going to look inside of the tests folder, which doesn't exist right now, and it's going to look for any file with the suffix of test.php with a capital T. Then for usage inside of the test, it's going to, PHP unit is going to whitelist anything in the source directory, which again doesn't exist yet, with a suffix of, or a file extension of .php. Okay. And then down here, in theory, it will tell me the PHP errors that it runs into. So let's go ahead and save that. And I'm going to run PHP unit again, and it says no test executed. So it's not a hard failure that it doesn't find that /tests folder or even the source folder. It's going to run itself and say, hey, didn't find any. So what we're going to do is we're going to say new folder. We're going to call that tests, plural. And I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to say main test.php. Go ahead and save that. Oh, I don't have my license stored on this one. All right, so I'm going to grab this. So up here, 8-fold string tests, that's the namespace for the tests. PHP unit framework test case, this is pulling in a class called test case that's inside of vendor PHP unit source, right? Like in there somewhere. And it's known because of the composer file that comes with that package. All right, so now by default, PHP unit has a lot of different ways that you can run things. The main one is just start a function name with the string of test. Test works, and then we're going to say this assert true, true, and run PHP unit again. And we can see that it's green because this test passes. We can say false, and it fails. Right. So one of the other ways, just because I opened that can of worms, is you can say public function this test environment works. Some people like to do the underscores. I'm not a fan, and the reason I'm not a fan is because you have to shift, and it's a two-handed thing. But this is a way to do it, and you can also say test. So you can mark this as being a test, and I can say this assert true, false, and I can run the test, and you can see that basically it says there were 2 tests that were run, there were 2 assertions that were made, and there was 1 failure. Right? So one of the assertions did not pass, and basically by putting in this doc block, it basically says this is a test. It tells PHP this, or PHP unit, this is a test. Now you can also say group string, and I can say group equals string, and you can see here it had 1 test, 1 assertion, and 1 failure. Right, so that's how we know that it only ran this one. And if you're skeptical, we can do the same thing here. And now it should pass, right? So again, you can do a lot with these annotations, and there's different ways of going about it, and of just tagging things. We're really not going to need to do all that, so we're good. But what we're going to do now that we have our tests working is we are going to go ahead and write our first test for this class, but I'm going to get things sort of set up. So this is basically our testing window, and this is going to be our reference window. So if I go to Swift 5 string docs, I think. Yeah. So the Swift standard library has a string, and it's a struct, and we don't have structs. Closest we'd get is a class. And so anyway, down here somewhere, there we go, down here it has a list of all the functions, all the methods and variables that you can get to, and what they do, and that sort of a thing. So that's good. So what we want to do, the first test we're going to write is we're going to write public function test not or can initialize. Okay, so this assert not null, we should be able to say result equals new str, which will be the name of the class that we are going to build. And if I run, I get an error. And I get an error because this class that it's looking for could not be found. Okay, that's true because I haven't built it yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here, create new folder, going to create that source folder, create new file, str.php, save it in the source directory, declare it as PHP, establish the namespace, which is eightfold string, and call it str, and there we go. That should be enough to make this pass, or not. Oh, right. So let's go in here. We're going to say use, because I have to tell PHP that I want to use that file, or use that class. So now it's going to use the composer file to figure out what I mean by eightfold string, the namespace, and then it's going to go inside of that source folder and find the string or the str class. And I'm using str because string is a reserved name inside of PHP. You cannot name a class string. All right, so we are able to initialize a string. Good times. So hopefully that gives you just sort of a real simple overview of setting up an environment and how it is kind of easy. The hardest part, at least when I was first starting out, was figuring out an elegant way to do that PHP environment, like set up and get that PHP environment running. And with things like MAMP now and a bunch of other stuff, like it's not that hard. And like I said, PHP is inside of macOS by itself, so you can even run just a PHP server and call it a day. Like I said, I like to use MAMP, so that's kind of what I do. So that's going to be the end for this video of just setting up a package, setting up an environment, and getting it ready to be able to run tests. And then I'm going to come back with another video to really kind of go hog wild on this string class. So until then, thanks for making the time.